Rick and Mort.
You can wait until year's end to cross the bridge to the 21st century, or you can cross over now through a secret side door. Presenting the all-new Power Macintosh G3. It's not only the world's most powerful personal computer. It's also the most open-minded. Presenting the all-new Power Macintosh G3.
Your smile can't disguise.
We set out to make a computer just for our pro customers. From the ground up, we asked ourselves, what do they want? What do they want for performance? What do they want for expansion? What do they want for features and industrial design? What do they want for the whole system?
To try and design an object that elicits the reaction of, I really want that, is enormously fun.
I can hardly wait to hold you, feel my arms around you.
These machines are beautiful, but they kick ass. We're building the fastest machines in the PC industry. So we start with a 400 megahertz processor with a 1 meg backside cache, up to a gigabyte of high performance memory.
It supports the technologies that we've been trying to use for a long time now anyway. Fiber channel, 64-bit PCI bus, 66 megahertz PCI bus.
I have not seen any other machine, any other platform have that kind of performance.
If sex is power and the computer gives you power, there's lots of sex in these machines.
Gamers are looking for performance. Games today have realistic environments that are generated by tons and tons of polygons. So we need the most advanced machines out there to make the games look great.
The brand new ATI Rage 128. This is the fastest graphic accelerator available, and it's in the Macintosh first.
The Rage 128 hardware is among the best available anywhere. It delivers very good performance and extremely good quality. This platform will deliver several times better performance than anything that's been available in the Mac before.
With the new G3, we broke the laws of physics. We actually put more features, more expandability into a smaller box.
So we designed it so one flip of a lever and the whole door opens, you have full accessibility into the enclosure. To make it really easy to add memory, to make it really easy to add I/O cards. No special tools, it's all right there.
Handles to pick it up, a door to get inside. What a great thought, and it took Apple to do it.
The professional is going to lust after the I/O capacity. The thing has got every go-fast technology that's on the market today.
Ultra ATA 33, FireWire, USB, 100 megabit Ethernet, all on the motherboard now.
If you want the future of I/O, it's USB and FireWire.
You don't have to worry about cable links. You don't have to worry about terminations. You don't have to worry about device select addresses. You just plug it in and it works.
I mean, 127 devices on USB, 63 devices on FireWire. And it's the easiest thing in the world. I just take this camera with a simple FireWire cable, I plug it into my Power Mac G3, and digitally take that video onto my computer, and bam, I'm editing video and I'm on my way.
It's got to be utterly compelling performance in terms of raw speed and power, but also these have to be objects that are totally seductive.
We had to make a powerful machine. We had to give customers tremendous features. We had to make it gorgeous. We also had to make it really affordable.
When customers see the new technology and they see the new design, they're going to be all over these machines.
They're going to see this thing, they're going to go nuts. They're going to want it.
Building the fastest machines in the industry is great. It's what drives us.
We're putting them right into production.
It is gorgeous.
That's right. Now we don't have to hide the computer anymore.
The computer absolutely can be sexy. Yeah, it can.
I can hardly wait to hold you, feel my arms around you. How long I have waited just to love. Now that I have found you, don't ever go, don't ever go, don't ever go, don't ever go.
Hello, I'm Greg Hrutkay of Hrutkay Mods, and welcome to episode 7 of my PowerPC Series. In this episode, we'll be officially introducing you to my Power Mac G3 Blue and White. Now, this was a very important Mac in Apple's history. It was also a very unique Mac in Apple's history, and also a not very popular Mac in Apple's history. But it was important nonetheless. This was the signification, the very ending of the beige Pro line of Macintoshes in Apple's history. This was the first one that wasn't beige, and it was sort of based off of the Mac that preceded it, which was the Power Macintosh G3 that was introduced in November of 1997, which I believe was the first G3 Mac introduced. So, that's the basis of this whole series is G3 and on. So that's an important Mac, but it was a very different system. It looked very different, and I'll show you some pictures of the system. And it also had many different other things. It was a different Mac altogether. This system was the start of the modern Macs, in my opinion. The Macs that were introduced after Jobs returned. Of course, the first Power Mac G3 was after Jobs returned, but wasn't one of his ideas. It had already really started its design process before he even came back, and it was based off a former model's case and all that stuff. This system was very important. It was advertised very uniquely, talking about how it was easy to expand and how it was easy to open and access. And this was the basis for every Power Mac from this one in January of 1999 all the way to the last Power Mac G4 mirror drive door that was sold in around mid-2004. It's the same case design, basically. Of course, the MDD is way different, and we'll talk about that in the future. But the case itself, the design of it is essentially the same. The way it opens is essentially the same, and it was very important. And it's got a lot of neat features. But getting on to why it wasn't very popular. This system, it's very unique. It came in the iMac color of Blueberry, which was similar to Bondi Blue, which was the first iMac color when the iMacs came out. It's similar, but it was the light blue color that came out when the slot load iMacs came out. But those came in multiple different colors. This only came in Blueberry, which is this color right here, and we'll be showing you more of that up close. Blueberry, that's the problem. This case was so radical, it threw the professionals off by a lot. If you remember back to the 90s, if you were alive even then, any computer in general was beige. And all the professionals had beige towers because that's the only thing you could get, unless you had a Next computer in the early 90s. Of course, those were black, but no one could afford them, and that's why Next stopped making computers and why they ended up going to software, then getting bought out by Apple, and hey, Steve Jobs is back. Anyway, getting back to the point. All computers were beige, like the Power Mac G3 I just showed you. So professionals, when you're in a professional setting, dull and drab is basically the way to go. And there is, in the video of the keynote, a part where Jobs unveils the the tower, and you can see it right here.
We think we've built the most expandable Macintosh ever. Which brings us to best design. So, I'd love to show you what it looks like right now. Can we get it out here, please? The 1999 new Power Macintosh G3. It is really, really beautiful. It's got handles so you can pick it up. It's got all the removable storage in the front. It's built out of polycarbonate, which is the same stuff they use to make bulletproof vests out of. Like all of our products, we've tried to make it look as good in the back as it does from any other side. And it's really, really come out nice. It's more compact than the unit it replaces, and yet packs far more revolutionary technology inside. But there's one other thing. You see, design, we don't think design is just how it looks. We think design is how it works. And we labored a lot on this because our pro customers want accessibility. They know there's a lot of great technology inside, but they want access to that technology instantly, to add memory, to add cards, to add drives. And so we think we've got the most incredible access story in the business. And you know what it's called? Let's get the video up here. It's called a door. We just open this thing here, and there it is. Isn't that cool? That's it. Just open the door, and there it is. There's a gigabyte of memory.
As you can see there, it was kind of a mixed reception. It wasn't really received very well because of how radical it was. You know, people were expecting a dull and drab system like Apple had been supplying for the professionals. Of course, people loved the multicolored things for home use and not super professional settings and in schools. But professionals, you know, unless they're really unique people, they tend to go with more drab things. Not every professional does, but some do. And because of this, Apple realized this. And when the graphite was introduced, the Power Mac G4 graphite, when it was introduced, it was vastly different. It's the same case design, but all the materials are different, and the color's different, and it doesn't look the same even though it is the same. And you can see that in pictures like this. Anyway, so like I said, it wasn't very popular, and it came out for a very short time. It was available from January 5th, 1999, all the way through August 31st, 1999, when the Power Mac G4 was introduced. Now, there was multiple reasons why it wasn't popular, and yet it still did sell well, considering. But it just, like I said, could have sold better. It was based off of an architecture and design that at that point was going out. People knew the G4s were coming, so it was not going to sell as well. People wanted the G4s. The G4s were better, more efficient, etc., etc. But the people who needed a Power Mac at that time, then and there, it was still a very powerful system. And in fact, it kept up with the G4s for quite some time until better software came out and more streamlining came out, and etc., etc. But it was very powerful then, and it was still very powerful years later. Today, it's not super powerful, as you'll see in further parts of this video. But as I'm covering this, the G4, it was expected to be coming, so people were holding off for the G4. And that was one of the reasons why Apple realized that it just wasn't selling very well. It did sell well. There were a number of professionals that bought them. They're pretty plentiful, but they had a lot of problems because of the way they were designed and all the new technology that were in them. This was the first professional Mac that came with USB standard. It was also the first Mac to come with FireWire. And because of all that, it allowed this system to be upgraded to Tiger and made this the oldest Mac that could be upgraded to Tiger officially. Like I covered earlier in the series, any G3 can run Tiger, but it might take some hacking to do that. But this was the oldest officially supported G3 to run Tiger. And it's got a lot of neat things in it. It had, like I said, USB, FireWire. They killed off SCSI in this system. The previous system before that, SCSI was standard. This introduced IDE. And IDE, of course, ended up running through Macs all the way up into late 2008 with the 2008 Mac Pros for optical drives. But IDE became the standard, and you couldn't get it on board SCSI, which also turned off a lot of professionals. But there was an option to get SCSI cards to support this system, and for the Power Mac G4s up into the Quicksilver as a factory option. By the Quicksilver, they basically killed that off. But, you know, it was vastly different than the previous model. It was the first model to kill off floppy drives in the professional. The iMac had already done that in the consumer-based market, but it was the first one to kill off floppy drives for professional market. It came with a zip drive, which at that time was really cool. Now it's kind of useless, but you know, I used it in the past too. I enjoyed zip, but anyway, it had a lot of really neat features, and we'll be going over all of them. This system right here that I have in front of me happened to be one of the last blue and whites ever made. And if you've seen episode 6, which you can click to the link up here to watch that, I unboxed it and found out a lot of things and special materials and stuff. It came with all the original documentation, all the order forms, all the neat things. And I learned many things about this system. The original owner must have really been a important, he must have really wanted to make things, really be multimedia, or he just wanted the most powerful system. I don't know what it was. But this system right here was the most powerful system you could buy. When I went and bought this, sight unseen, like I explained in the last video, I didn't know what was in it. I had no clue what was in it. There wasn't much detail about it at all in the listing. I was figuring it was going to be a early 300 megahertz first revision. It turned out to be the second revision and the 450 megahertz. So it was the most powerful. And it also came with 2 SCSI cards and a SCSI drive. This system actually came with just SCSI. It didn't have any IDE drives in it whatsoever except for the optical drive. But the hard drive, it came with the original hard drive. It was a 9 gigabyte Quantum Atlas 4, which is still in it, and it's still connected. I've done some other things, I'll explain to you later on, and moved some things around and took things out, but that drive's still in there. It didn't come with any IDE drives originally. It did when I bought it. It had one. I'll also explain to you about what that drive was. That's not the original drive, and I didn't know it at the time when I was filming that video. But it's a very special system. It was the last of the Power Mac G3s ever. made in August. It was shipped out August 25th, 1999. It was ordered probably somewhere in mid-August. So, you know, just a few days later, they stopped making them. And this had every single option, and it had 256 megs of RAM, which was a lot back then. And, of course, these are upgradable to 1 gigabyte. So, yeah, that was cool. But, you know, these came standard with 128 megs, I think. So 256, that's double. And it had the most powerful processor in it, and the Rage 128 Pro and all that stuff in it. It was maxed out. It even had the DVD decoder on the card, which was another option. They didn't come with those standard. This even originally had a DVD RAM drive in it, which I couldn't save. We'll cover that later too. But, you know, this system's completely built now. One more thing before we actually go and look at this system. This did come in 2 different revisions. The first version and the second version. The first version was the 300 megahertz all the way up to the 400. So you had 300, 350, and the 400 megahertz. And then the second revision was the 350, 400, and 450 megahertz. Okay? So if you have a 300 megahertz, you have a first revision no matter what. And if you have a 450, you have a second revision no matter what, unless it's been upgraded. Okay. The big differences between the 2 revisions. If you don't know what revision it is because you have one of those chips in the center of the speed range, you'll have to, I'll show you later in the video, you'll have to look at the IDE controller. The earlier revision had problems with having 2 drives in it. They didn't work right. It had multiple IDE problems. And that's because of all the new technology they were cramming into the system that they hadn't crammed into a Mac before. And that chip, it just didn't work. In fact, those systems, when you upgrade them to OS X, period, OS 10, a lot of people call it OS X, some call it 10. I call it X. I know the debate of that. But anyway, OS X, when you install that on a first revision, the drive tends to corrupt a lot. And that means you lost the install unless you've backed it up. And that's just because of that chip. It was not a good chip. But those systems, from what I hear, if you were just using one drive and you kept it on Mac OS 9 or older, it was fine. It would run with no problems. But, you know, if you wanted to go to OS X, it was a crapshoot. But with the second revision, they fixed that. And this system now has 2 IDE drives in it, and they both work great. It's really cool. But also, it's such an interesting machine. And another thing on the second revision is the ATI Rage 128s. They had a extra heat sink on them. That's another way you can tell, unless that's of course been replaced. But that's another way you can tell. And so, anyway. So, I think I've basically covered everything I need to cover for this part of the section of the video. Now let's open up and talk about it. Talk about all the functions, features, and everything I've done to it to rebuild it and restore it. And I'll be showing you pictures and just really getting into the meat and bones of this whole system. So let's get to it. Okay guys, it's time to re-meet my Smurf Tower. Now this isn't a nickname I lovingly gave it. In fact, the nickname I gave it was the Power Smurf G3. But anyway, the nickname, the Smurf Tower, is of course because it's blue and white. It wasn't really originally a loving nickname that Mac users gave it. From what I can tell, it was more of a mocking nickname, and now it's more of a loving nickname. But still, it was nicknamed the Smurf Tower, and this was also known as code name Yosemite. So, you know, Apple was naming their devices after Californian mountains, and their products after California mountains far, far before they started doing it with OS X. And we'll show you later on in this video the code name that's in the case on the main board. But anyway, this is my system and all the original parts that I had to take out of it to upgrade it. Now, if you saw the last video, which I gave the link before, but will again, it was in rough shape. It was in a really, really bad state of disrepair. It was covered in dust. Actually, the panels were pretty yellow. It was really nasty. And the more I dug into it, the nastier it got. Every time I'd open it up and take parts out of it to restore it, as we can see in these pictures that will be popping up, it wasn't pretty. Everything was coated in dust, inside and out, even under the panels. And every time I'd open it, my hands would end up black. It was awful. As we can see here, these are the original parts that I had to take out. Earlier in the video, I stated it was a DVD RAM drive. That was really before DVD RAM even existed. I meant DVD ROM. But, you know, this is the original drive. I don't know what's wrong with it. It won't show up on the system. I've tried everything. And once I opened up to clean it and try to diagnose it, it won't open or close properly anymore. So, once again, I have no clue what's wrong with it, and I decided not to mess with it. Above it is the latching tray. It's still busted. I decided to replace it with a latching tray from a Power Mac G4 graphite, which is literally the same. It's even the same model number. It's just it's got a cutout in it for the north bridge, and it's a different revision number. But other than that, it's the same tray. Next to it, we have the ATI Rage 128 with the DVD decoder, which was a very rare feature. This allowed you to decode the DVDs so you could watch them in Mac OS. It's a neat thing. It didn't come on all cards. It was an extra thing you had to buy, and still. Also, the Revision 2 heatsink, it's right here, and that's the original card. I'll show you what I replaced it with in a second. Here's one of the SCSI cards. Like I said, I'm not very familiar with SCSI, although I did read some tutorials on how to set up the drive that's in the system with the other card. But here's one of the SCSI cards, and this is all the original parts that aren't in the system anymore. So let's now take a look at the system, and we'll show you everything we can about it, and then we'll hook it up to my studio display here, and we'll go to town on showing you operating systems and how it's set up currently. Now, the beginning of the video started out filming pretty rough. It took me a while to film it, and at the time I was filming it, which was actually yesterday, I was half asleep and ready to go to bed, actually. I was worn out. But, so I can't quite remember everything I said about the system in the beginning, so I'll cover some of the same things again, probably. But, you know, just stick around with that. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. But anyway, here's the tower. And it's, you know, just basically like any other blue and white. This is what they looked like. Now, some of them I don't believe came with zip drives, but I think most did. And this is basically what any blue and white would look like I said before. This has been heavily restored. In fact, I took this down to every single last nut and bolt, and literally every single part in the system, except of course for the hard drives, were actually completely torn down. And that includes the power supply and all that stuff. And once again, I work on power supplies a lot. I know what I'm doing. Never open a power supply unless you know what you're doing, because there's capacitors in power supplies that can kill you really, really, really quick. So, you know, keep that in mind. Don't just go blindly opening a power supply and having metal things touching contacts and stuff, because you're going to have a very bad day. But like I said, I tore down everything, and we'll be tearing down this whole system again so you can see each part intimately. Now, I didn't take any pictures of the panels when I was washing them. Basically what I did was I tore down all the plastic pieces that I could wash, and basically just put them into my bathtub and put some OxyClean and dish soap in it, and went to town scrubbing everything down. And as you can see, the panels are once again white. There were some panels that had cracks in them. Apple liked to boast that this was made out of polycarbonate, which was the same stuff that was made out of that bulletproof vests were made out of. That's also, I think, why bulletproof vests have an expiration date, because polycarbonate doesn't stay bulletproof forever. It gets brittle. In this case, started getting brittle. There's cracks in it in certain areas, especially in the handles, which I had to reinforce with body panel epoxy. And it seems to be nice and sturdy now, but still, it's something I need to watch if I lift this thing up a lot. The back had some hairline cracks in the screws, and the front had hairline cracks in the support in the back. But still, I tore it all down and made it look pretty again. And with the case itself, the metal case, I also basically, I stripped every single part out of it and just stuck it in the bathtub because it was that nasty. All the other parts that I cleaned, I basically wiped down with rubbing alcohol, lots and lots and lots of rubbing alcohol to get all the stains out of them, between all the random bits of mold and what looked like urine stains. You know, this thing's as clean as it can be, although the power supply for some reason still smells a little musty. When it's running, it smells clean now. Just don't get behind it while it's running. But anyway, this is the case. We've got the optical drive cover, which had even a button to eject it. This didn't stick around very much longer because Steve Jobs didn't like extra buttons on his products, and he would have actually basically gone with no buttons at all if he could have. But of course you need to open the thing and, you know, turn things on and stuff. So you need buttons. And if you just heard that noise, that would have been my Mac Pro closing its drive. I don't even know why it was open. But I have my Mac Pro running right now. Anyway, getting back to the point. You know, Steve Jobs didn't like buttons on his products. He tried everything to keep from having buttons. And if you notice right here on the zip drive, the button's even covered up. There was a physical button behind this, which we'll show you in a second. But you couldn't access it. You could only eject the drive with software. So that was kind of a drawback. And then we have the power button, the reset button, and the programmer's button, which I really don't know what it's for. It doesn't really do anything. And in later revisions, it didn't even come on the systems. So when I say later revisions, I mean later models of Power Mac. But anyway, and as we can see here, here's the blueberry finish. It's a very pretty computer. You know, Apple boasted about its gaming performance too. You know, id Software, for instance, you know, they wanted to make sure this system could run the original Quake at 60 frames per second with full 3D rendering. And the original Quake came out much later, I believe, on Mac. Essentially, it was a 3-year-old, well, it was 2.5 maybe year old game at the time. So I wouldn't have boasted about that whole lot, but it could do that. It could play it at 60 frames per second with no problem, from what I hear. I don't have that game to test that theory, and now with all the upgraded parts in it, it could actually play it a lot quicker, I'm sure. Also, if you look down here with the speaker, you'll notice that you can see the grill and stuff that covers the speaker. Originally, there's supposed to be foam over it, but through the years, the foam turned into this gooey mush that disintegrated when I touched it, essentially, and ended up all over my hands, and I think I still have some of it glued to the floor. I can't seem to get it up, and it seemed to harden on the floor. Pretty nasty stuff. So now you can see that grill through there instead of this kind of a dark gray circle. That was one little problem I had there. And then inside we can see that I replaced the drive. This is actually from the MDD right there. It's just a combo drive, CD burner, DVD player. It can read dual layers, which is why I needed for some of my future plans for this system. But anyway, getting on to the point, let's take a quick tour around this case. And as we can notice on the side of it, we can see the G3 that shows through the translucent side panel. Pretty neat thing. And of course, it was only on the blue and white. It wasn't on later Power Macs like the G4s. And the G4s, even though this case for the graphite is literally identical, it's made out of different materials. It's a different color, dark bluish gunmetal gray kind of color, and the side panels are a silver color like you'd see on the Quicksilver or the MDD. But anyway, losing my voice again there. As we can see in the back, we've got dual FireWire, and these actually aren't integrated in the board. They're on a daughter card. Even though this is boasted as built-in, it's actually a different module that's on the board, which, you know, it's, in my opinion, not really built-in, but it's still FireWire. Then we've got an ADB port, which was for legacy keyboards and mice, and the later model of it's essentially the blue and white, the G4 version of it, the graphite, which was the low-end model, which came in a 400 megahertz and a 350 megahertz. The 400 didn't last very long. It was only for roughly a month. It used the same motherboard. It's identical, except it doesn't have an ADB port. And that model was the Yikes model. And that was just the low-end G4. The other ones were the Sawtooth, which had a different bus and stuff for the CPU, and were more efficient and more powerful. But anyway, getting on to that point. Up here we have a lock we can pull out to lock the side of the case. And right here would be where a dial-up modem was, but usually on the high-end systems, which this one is, it didn't come with a dial-up modem. Then we have a 10100 Ethernet jack here, and two USB 1.1s, and then a microphone and a speaker jack. And this, I believe, was the very last Power Mac that was officially called a Power Macintosh. Before they shortened the name. So that's something there. Later on, when the G4s came out, they were just known as the Power Mac. And even when they were introducing this, they called it in the keynote a Power Mac. I don't think ever really mentioned Power Macintosh in the whole time. But in advertisements, the official model name and all that stuff, it's Power Macintosh. Then right here we have the original specs right here. It came with a 450 megahertz G3 with the 1 megabyte of cache, 256 megs of SD RAM, the 9 gigabyte SCSI drive, which I'll show you, the SCSI cards, the zip drive, the Rage 128, which I believe came on all blue and whites, the Ethernet jack, and it even came with a keyboard, which of course I don't have. And it came with a DVD drive, which not all of them came with. Here we have the power supply with the input for power and an output for monitor support. You could power it was a straight pass-through, and you could power the monitor off of that. And of course later Power Macs didn't have that. And then down here we have a ATI Radeon 9200 PCI card. That's basically the most powerful video card you can upgrade the system with. Under it we have a Airport Extreme compatible generic Wi-Fi card. In Tiger, this literally shows up as an Airport Extreme card, and in Panther this also works with some software installs. It shows as a third-party card, but still. Under it we still have the other SCSI card, which is powering that bus for the hard drive, and under that we have a USB 2.0 card. So that's that. Now let's open this system up. This system, of course, the main basic case design carried all the way over to the MDD. But like for instance, the handles are swappable between the two, which I can even show you a picture of that. And the biggest feature that Apple boasted was, of course, this thing was easily upgradable and easy to open. And of course, started the easy to upgrade Macs that existed until that stupid trash can Mac Pro came out in 2013. And this was the biggest boast about the whole system. The oven door designed, it's like an oven door, side door, which actually has the logic board connected straight to it. If we grab this and pull back, it just opens right up. And here's the insides. Basically, we've got this Maxter drive here. This is actually an original drive that would have been in the system if this had come with one. I actually found it on eBay extremely cheap because I was looking for a dual IDE cable, which would have been in the second revision Power Mac, but for some reason it didn't come with one. And I'm trying to figure out where I just put the original cable. It's not important. Essentially, the original cable that came in the system for some reason was just with one IDE header, although this controller of course can use two. This drive right here is a 6 gigabyte Maxter drive, and it's error correct. I can't believe I found it on eBay, especially as cheap as I did. And then under it is the hard drive that came with the system when I got it. It's a 40 gigabyte Maxter drive, which in the previous video I explained to you was the original drive, and it isn't. That is right there. I also mentioned how skinny it was. Well, there's a reason for that. It's a 2004 hard drive, which is an Apple hard drive. It's got an Apple logo on it, but it's actually a drive that would have been in either a late MDD or a eMac or even a late iMac G4, but it wasn't original to this system. Then right here we have that Quantum Atlas 4 9 gigabyte SCSI drive, and we've got the speakers here. The speaker actually has been fixed. It works now for the most part. The speaker works, but the connector, which is right here, is loose, and it's still garbled a little bit when it starts up and has some static on it. I'll probably have to resolder it, but I didn't bother with it right now. I've got a new Pram battery. Here's the cards I talked about earlier with the USB 2, the SCSI card, the airport card right here, and the ATI Rad-On 9200. This card supports, I think it's OS 10.2 and on, 10.2.8 I think. And also supports OS 9.2.2, but you have to use the original card to install the KEX, well, it's extensions in OS 9 to install the extensions for this. Otherwise OS 9 will freeze when booting up, and even when you install it, so you have to use the original card. Or of course you can add those in with OS X, but still. Then on this board we have, if you notice right here, 3 256 meg modules. The last one's missing, and that's because this board was damaged. I mentioned in the last video the board might be damaged, or it might be the modules. It was also the board. I think those modules are still damaged, but I think the drop itself broke something, and the system would boot up with a whole gig in it, but then it would randomly start closing out apps and not starting them back up because the memory would dump everything, and eventually it would either freeze or completely crash and panic. So you know, that was a definite sign that the RAM had something wrong with them, and I figured out it was this slot. And I want to try to fix this, but I haven't yet, and I don't really know how I can. So right now we have 768 megabytes of RAM. Here's the FireWire module I talked to you about. It's got a connector underneath it, and then this I think is a power cable. Really tiny, really weird way for, it's not elegant. And then we have other things here. We have the latch tray here. I actually moved the original label to this. It's not perfect, but unless you're really looking at it, it still looks proper. It's a little off center, but good. Then we have the rest of the latching tray. As we can see here, the latches are on here. If you look in the pictures, the old latch, I used body panel adhesive, and this stuff I fix plastic with all the time. And whatever this latch tray is made out of, it just didn't like it. And the latches ended up snapping back off. So I gave up on it, and I managed to find this latch tray, which is actually pretty hard to find, and I found it for a very good price from I think it's called Apple Rescue of Denver. So that was pretty cool. And as we can see here, this is what it looks like when you open the case. It pushes this down and moves the tray back and forth. which this is basically the same design that carried all the way through the Quicksilvers. When the MDD came out, it switched to a latching system that's in here. But basically, this oven door part still is the same in the MDD. Now, here's the neatest part right here. This is the original 450 megahertz G3. I've overclocked it to 500 megahertz, and it's bone stock stable using all the stock parts. Now, I will probably eventually upgrade this to a G4. I'm looking for a Yikes G4. Like I said, this board's identical except for the missing 80B port. Otherwise it's identical, and this will take a Yikes G4. But right now, I may also look for another upgrade CPU if I can. I really want to try to find an aftermarket dual core. It's got 2 G4s on it. It sticks out to about right here, and it uses an extra Molex cable to power the system. That would be really neat too. But right now we have the original G3. It's been overclocked, and this system was one of the easiest to overclock systems. And I'll be doing a video because I may actually overclock this more if I can. This right here is a jumper block that controls the whole bus speed and basically controls the clock on the CPU itself. Now, this CPU I did, of course, take a clean up and restore also. And this is a example of why you need to replace the thermal paste on any Power Mac Mac if you can find any PowerPC Mac. The Apple's thermal compound just sucked. In fact, if you look in the pictures, this was before I actually cleaned the thing. If you notice, there's nothing on the CPU, and the thermal paste was just hard as a rock on here. And of course G3s don't run really hot. It really wouldn't matter if I even put thermal paste back on it, but I put Arctic Silver 5 on it, and it runs cool. And of course, since it's overclocked, it's good to have more cooling. So the thermal paste was a good thing. And then, this is what it looks like on the inside. And now, I said I'd take it apart, but there's not much of a point. I will show you how this cover comes off, though, because it's just kind of neat. There's 2 tabs right here. You just kind of pull them, push them, and it just comes off and pulls out. Pretty cool. And this is what the drives look like. And as I said, it's actually a real button. So, I understand why Steve Jobs wanted it covered up, but, it was there. Why not at least put something there to soft eject it? Well, hard eject it. It was still hardware based. If it wasn't on, it wouldn't eject, but still. And then this just lines back up with some teeth in here, and you push these back a some and line it up in the holes, which I'm not doing for some reason, and it just pops right back in. And pretty cool. And that's basically everything. It's all nice and clean now. Took apart all the fans, the power supply, etc., etc. And it's clean now. It's nearly spotless, really. There's a few spots that I think I missed, but in the case itself, it's clean. And the last thing I want to talk about before we close this sucker up is what's on these drives. On the SCSI drive for now, this is just for now. I am going to do more with the system. But on the SCSI drive for now, there is Panther completely updated, 10.3.9. It runs fine on that. And then on the original 6 gig drive, well, of course this isn't the original drive, but the era correct drive, it's running OS 9. And under it, the 40 gigs currently running Tiger. So that's all that. Then we have my SCSI cable as nicely set up as you can. It still doesn't look great, but you can't do a whole lot about it. And you know, every part in here other than the RAM is Apple original. You know, Apple made it, and it's Apple. There's nothing really aftermarket in it. Well, that in the card right here, and the, you know, aftermarket airport card here, and USB card. But you know, all the rest of the hardware is Apple. There's nothing, you know, aftermarket. So anyway, let's close up this system, and we'll hook it up. And and the other thing, if you saw in the last video, this wouldn't close at all. I fixed that. When it was dropped, I think it knocked this screw a little loose, and with the vibrations it pulled out and spun out. There's no damage here at all. I don't even know how it really came out. I guess it was just loose and the vibrations spun it out. But the drop definitely hit right here. There is a crack there. I made sure these handles were in the same area that they were, although these are swappable. There was a crack here, and you know, there's still a small gap here. I never could get quite shut, but I believe basically all Power Macs of this era have some gap, some worse than others. But I fixed all this. When it was dropped, you know, it snapped the clips and it twisted the system and the board, I think, slammed it into itself, and there's some tabs down here. These tabs were actually bent inwards, and that's why it wasn't closing. The hinge and the case itself wasn't warped, which I was actually surprised. So that's how I fixed it. I pulled these tabs out, and it closed right back up with no problem. So, you know, nice and clean, everything works again. Even the latch, it's fine. So anyway, let's hook it up. We'll look at the software setup, and we'll wrap up the video. Okay, so this is my current setup here. Let's just quickly go over it. Here we have an ADC studio display. I have it in a ADC to DVI adapter, which I got really cheap. I'll go over ADC displays further on in the future, but this is my studio display. It's damaged. There's some damage on the LCD, which is very common. I got it cheap, so I'm not complaining. And because it was already damaged, I took all the shields out of it, and it's now transparent. Which, when I was looking at it, I'm like, man, that's a great looking display to go with the Power Mac. Because of course it came with studio displays. A lot of them were still CRTs. There was one LCD model, which was a 15-inch. And it was a little strange looking. But the other ones were CRT. And of course the ADC didn't come out until mid-2000. This specific display came out in mid-2000. The model. And this was actually, I think, the second or third revision of it. The last version, actually, I think this has a 2003 copyright date on it. But they were all essentially the same displays. They just had minor differences on them. Slightly different color, different font text, but other than that, it's the same display. And I just thought it looks really good in this system here. And right here we have an iHome keyboard I found. It's really neat. It's wireless. I thought it went great with the system. It's also iOS 9 compatible, which is also really neat. And then we have this really, really awful iHome mouse, which connects when it wants to. And you'll probably see me fiddle with the dongle some in this video because the mouse may not connect. It looks cool, but it's also not even Mac OS 9 compatible, which is a pain. And because of that, I've got a second USB mouse connected to this system, which I'm not showing because, well, it's a rival company that Apple didn't like at that time. That might give you an idea who it is. But, you know, I don't want to be showing that in the video. But this is the setup I have currently. And the dongles are actually plugged into the ADC display. And, of course, it's controlled through that adapter. So anyway, let's turn the system on and we'll start everything up. So we'll start by pressing the power button. And we'll probably hear the bong, which is going to be pretty muffled or staticky. I'm not really sure which. I don't remember exactly what volume I've left it at. So let's just start it up and see. And of course this is a 90s computer, so it's going to be loud. And it's got 3 drives running in it, and all of them are loud. The power supply is actually somewhat quiet, surprisingly. It's got a little bit of a noise to it, but the main loudness is the hard drives. So anyway, let's start it up. Hey, that wasn't too muffled this time. And it should boot straight into Tiger. It's after it starts up the open firmware, it boots pretty quick. There's the open firmware. Open firmware actually runs quicker on a G3 for some odd reason. You know, but the hard drive it's running off of is the IDE drive, and it's running through an ATA 33. By the end of the oven door Power Macs, they were running at ATA 100. So that was a big difference in speed. So this bus is pretty slow, but still it's quick. There's another thing about this. This was a weird transition-like system. So it doesn't have a boot menu in it, which is a bit of a pain because switching between operating systems is a problem, especially if I finally get Linux to work on it. I've been having problems getting Linux to run, but I'll eventually get that to happen. I just gotta figure out how I get it to boot up. If I want to keep OS X as as the main boot system, you can't change it in the boot options on here. And the only way I'd be able to boot back into it is by putting in open firmware commands that I can't quite figure out. They're very complicated. But anyway, here's the system. The mouse actually connected. That's good. Here we're running Tiger, and of course it's just a normal old Tiger install. It's pretty quick considering what it's running on. Here's the specs. As we can see, it's got the overclock on it. We'll quickly show you what's going on here. You know, the ATA drives. The optical drive coincidentally runs on a different ATA bus, and the zip drive runs on that also. It's just a normal ATA API adaptee. I think that's how it's pronounced, the abbreviation for at Tappy. That's how it's pronounced. But anyway, it's just a normal old IDE. This was the early to mid 90s speed. It's extremely slow, but quick enough for a DVD drive. And then we've got the ATA 33 with the Maxter drive, the 40 gigs, the master drive, and then the slave drive's the 6 gig here. And then I'm losing my voice again, sorry. Anyway, and then we've got audio, and well, who really cares about all that? And then since this is an official Apple drive, it supports burning, which is great. You know, that's cool. And then we've got the FireWire, and then the Radeon 9200, and it's got 128 megs of graphics RAM, video RAM. That's really nice. It's going to make gaming on this a lot more fun. And then we've got the memory set up here. Of course, that last slot's empty. If I ever fix it, you know, I hope I can fix it, because I want to have a gig on here eventually. And the more RAM, the better in modern day things. Here's the PCI cards and the SCSI card with the drive. And, you know, that's basically all of it. Here's the USB 2 card. And here's the airport card, which, like I said, it identifies as a real Airport Extreme Wireless G card, which is cool. It works just like any other real official Apple airport card. Anyway, so now the G3 takes a while to load apps. I'll be speeding up the load times because it gets annoying after a while. But this actually is not too bad of a web browser, surprisingly. It's extremely slow if you use it as a normal Firefox, 10.4 Fox kind of thing. But other than that, it's not bad. And if you use the mobile sites, it's really darn quick. For instance, we can load up Facebook, and I can show you a few things. It's really cool. The iOS version of the web agent isn't super great. It's not light enough for the G3 to really power through it, but it can, and I'll show you. Right now I believe this is in the 10.4 Fox web agent. So we'll load up Facebook, and we'll watch this slowly load everything. And it's still loading. And I forgot to sign it in. 1 second. Okay, so I'm now signed in. We've got a new tab open here. This is what it would look like if you load the full Facebook page up. We'll just literally just type it in. 10.4 Fox may actually crash. It does occasionally on a G3, but it tends to stay open. I've had it crash a few times, but you know, hopefully it won't. I've just moved this window. Here we go. We're going to load it up, and this is going to be real time. So sit back. This is going to take some time. In fact, let's actually speed it up with my timer. 1 second. Now this will take a very painful, extremely long time to load a full web page, a modern Facebook page. This is all going to be in real time, as in it's going to be sped up because this video is already pretty darn long, but you'll see the actual real time right here. So let's get it loaded up. I'll give you an example of the 3 different ways you can web browse on this. The first way, it's too slow to use. It's way too slow. It's unusable. Of course, it will load some websites pretty darn quick. I've had it load some websites amazingly quick for how old the system is and how underpowered it is for today's websites. But this, of course, isn't one of those websites. And like I said, you can't use Facebook with the normal web agent. But you can in the other web agents. The emulations we're going to be running, which will start out with the iOS agent, and then we'll do the Classilla agent, which is an ultralight version. Of course, Classilla is for OS 9, and we're not going to be running Classilla, but 10.4 Fox actually has a Classilla web agent, so it will emulate that. And like I said, the web page, the whole browser is going to freeze while it's loading up, and that even slows it down more. But when it's in other web agents, it doesn't tend to do that, and hopefully it won't while I'm recording this. So anyway, let's hit enter and start loading up this web page. We'll start it all at real time, and in 3, 2, 1, enter. And it starts connecting. And it is basically fully loaded at 1:26. And that's for every page. Actually, it's still loading. Wow. So probably 1:40. Here we go. Now it's loaded. 1:40 per page would get pretty annoying, and it doesn't like to scroll a lot either. In fact, it may be slightly frozen right now. Here we go. It's scrolling now. It's painfully slow. But you know, that's just an example there. It's not useful. But let's make it useful. So I'll change the web agent here. Okay, we'll go over and change the web agent. And we'll reload everything again. And let's start all over again. Now we're loading the iOS web agent. It's still going to load kind of slow. Once Facebook is loaded, it runs quicker. This is basically loaded, I think. It's yeah, that's loaded, more or less. It took roughly, I think, 20 seconds, which is a lot more tolerable. It's still kind of slow. The scrolling's a little slow, but it's quick. It runs a lot quicker with the iOS version, but we can even make it quicker with the ultralight version of Facebook, which is basically literally just for slow systems. And like I said, I forgot to stop the clock here. It took roughly 20 seconds to load, and it only loads up as you scroll down, and it loads quickly. So yeah, let's do the ultralight version. We'll change the preferences again. Now the ultralight version takes a little getting used to, but it works quite well once you figure out how to use it. So we'll load this all up again. Alright, so let's do it again. And 3, 2, 1. And it's loaded up. It took 5 seconds. Literally, this is loaded. 5 seconds and it's done, which is amazing. And it's usable. Scrolling could be a little quicker, but you know, we can load anything we want by just pointing and clicking Like we'll load my photos, and here they are. Pretty quick. Now, of course, loading a photo will take some time. Actually, no, that wasn't too bad. You know, the ultralight version's very usable. We can use Facebook the way it's really meant. Well, not meant. Mobile's not really the way it's meant to be used. Of course, for the app it is, I'm sure. But full-size mobile's not, you know, the way it's meant to be used. But you can use this system for everyday web browsing, which is shocking and surprising. You just have to play around with it and tinker with it to get it to work. So now, what we are going to do is boot this sucker into Panther. We'll save the best for last, which is OS 9. But let's boot it into Panther. Now, of course, like I said, there's no boot menu. So we'll have to go to System Preferences and change the boot disk. And now it's got to spin up all the drives again because it's in power save mode. We'll hear those start up. And it's got to figure out where all the boot drives are. And then we can choose it. Okay. So like I said, these are on 3 separate drives. So each one will load differently. SCSI, even though for some reason my benchmarks show that the Tiger drive's actually quicker, the SCSI seems quicker. And SCSI was known to run quicker than IDE at the time. And I think IDE did eventually sort of catch up, but it was never quite the same. So we'll see that coming up. So let's restart it. And I won't time this. We're just going to speed it up. Just know that each operating system loads quicker. Panther's going to load slightly quicker than Tiger, and OS 9 boots up almost instantly. So let's do it. Now, like I said, we may have to play with the dongle some if the mouse doesn't reconnect or if something happens. Also in OS 9, the keyboard sometimes doesn't like to automatically connect, but still it's a better option than some of the other ones. I will eventually be getting a mouse and keyboard that's more era correct probably, though the mouse may still be an optical mouse. I'm going to get an original Pro keyboard that was blueberry colored. Or Bondi blue, they're about the same color. Depends on what I can find that's cheaper. So anyway, it's loading up right now, and let's just let it load. And here we have Panther, as we can see right here. Once it's fully loaded. Okay. And here's Panther. Now there's no new modern web browser for Panther. They never really developed one. But the people who created Tin4 Fox also created Classilla. And Classilla is compatible with OS 9 with the classic emulation, which we're going to show you really quick. There's not much of a point to show you much more because Classilla will load up web pages like Facebook at the same speed as the Classilla web agent. But let's show you how it boots up. And this will of course be using the files that are on the OS 9 drive. So we'll open up Classilla. It starts up the classic mode. It's not a very elegant way to do it, but it works. And it's a lot more secure. And here we go. And here's Classilla. Load up Google real quick. And hit enter. and it just works. That's basically it. Now on OS 9 I don't have internet, and that's because the Wi-Fi card isn't compatible with OS 9. I don't have any more PCI slots either to add a wireless B compatible card, so I'm just not going to. If I ever need internet for OS 9, I'll use my modified Airport Express to link it up, and I may eventually make a video on that. It's pretty neat, but right now let's just boot this sucker into OS 9 and then we'll wrap up the video. So we'll close out Classilla, and as we can see here, we do have Classic running right here. And we'll change the system preferences. Startup disk. It looks for all the drives, and we'll select OS 9. And here we go. And there's the muffled staticky noise. The connector just, I guess it gets warm with the board, and the warmer it gets, the less quality the sound is. But of course you can use external speakers, which I'd recommend anyway, because that speaker is awful anyway, and it's all mono. But here we go, booting into OS 9. And here we have OS 9 fully booted up. This is actually probably, I haven't really tested it, but this is going to probably be my main OS 9 system, at least for a while. It's not going to be my main gaming system for OS 9. I'm actually going to be converting my Quicksilver back to more standard factory for OS 9 to actually work properly. And that's going to be my main OS 9 gaming system. But this will be more for experimental reasons, and just for a more time period feel. This of course was an operating system that came out, I think it was around the time the Graphite G4 came out, so it was still very optimized for this system and very era correct. Of course 9.22 came out in 2001, but OS 9 came out in 99, and you know, it runs quite well. And we'll take a quick look at the system. Oh yeah, wrong mouse. Let me go grab the mouse. Okay, I've switched to the other mouse. As we can see, we have mouse now. We'll go to About This Computer, and here's About This Computer. Then we can go over to, you know, System Profiler, and take a look at everything. Here's all the specs and devices and volumes. And all that neat stuff there. And basically that's it for iOS 9, I mean Mac OS 9, I keep saying iOS. But anyway, that's basically it for Mac OS 9, and that's basically it for the video currently. I will be doing more things with this system. Like I said, this series is going to go for quite some time, and I've figured out that G3s actually are still very useful, which shocked me because my iBook G3 I thought was running pretty slow, and actually I think I can get it to run like this. In fact, it's basically matched in power. But still, I will be doing a lot more with this, making it quicker, making it faster, and yes, I'm going to keep all the original parts, so I could swap it back to its original form if I wanted to. But we'll be playing with this a whole lot. I'm going to switch this back to boot into Tiger. Startup disk. It will spin up all the drives again. Actually, they're already spinning. I don't think OS 9 has a power save feature. and select Tiger and restart. And that's basically it. The whole system's 99% functional except for that one memory slot, and it runs great. Sorry that it was a bit loud, maybe. Of course, like I said, it's a slow system, it's old, but it's still pretty useful if you are willing to take the time and do the work on it. I will be trying to finally get Linux to run on it, and I'll try to make this as modern as possible and have fun with it. So anyway, that is the end of this video, and thank you for watching. This has been a Hrutkay Mods video.